I still remember the morning he left. Not because something dramatic happened, but because nothing happened at all. There was no sound. No door slamming. No angry words echoing through the house. No final look over the shoulder. Just silence. And sometimes, silence hurts more than anything spoken out loud. I woke up that day with a strange heaviness in my chest. You know that feeling when something is wrong, even if you cannot explain why. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Just a tired mind. Just another long day ahead. But the house felt different. Cold, somehow. Almost like it was holding its breath. I walked through each room slowly, like my footsteps were afraid to disturb something. The living room. The small wooden table we bought together. The framed photos he always pretended he didn't like, but never asked me to take down. Everything was there. But he wasn't. At first, I didn't panic. I thought he had gone out early. Maybe for a walk. Maybe for some fresh air. He needed space sometimes, and I had learned to give it to him. But then I noticed his shoes by the door were missing. His jacket too. The one he wore only when he was leaving for a long time. I felt something uneasy rising inside me, but I forced myself to breathe. Maybe he just stepped out. Maybe he would be back before I even finished making tea. I kept telling myself these little lies. It's strange how our minds try to protect us, even when the truth is standing right in front of us, quiet and unmovable. I reached for my phone. No messages. No missed calls. No, I'll be back soon. Nothing. I dialed his number anyway. It rang once. Twice. And then it went silent straight to voicemail. That was the moment my hands began to shake. Still. I waited. I sat at the edge of the bed with my fingers interlocked, trying to keep myself from falling apart. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Then 2. And with each hour, the house grew heavier, like it was slowly accepting a truth that I was refusing to face. He didn't leave a note. He didn't send a message. He didn't even leave a trace of what he was thinking. He simply disappeared. Like I was someone he could walk away from without a single word. People always say the loudest breakups are the worst ones. But I don't think that's true. I think the quiet ones leave deeper cracks. Because they leave you alone with your thoughts. And your questions. Questions that have no answers. Questions that circle around your heart like cold wind. Was it something I said? Was it something I didn't do? Did he plan this? Did he really not care enough to tell me goodbye? I must have whispered those questions 100 times that morning. Sometimes out loud. Sometimes only in my mind. And still, nothing. Just that same silence. That same empty house. That same sinking feeling that something inside me had just broken even though I didn't fully understand it yet. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have imagined, was that the final message he left behind for me, the one I discovered much later, would hurt more than his leaving. Because it wasn't angry. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't even cold. It was soft. It was honest. And it was the kind of message that makes you rethink every moment, every memory, every small thing you thought didn't matter. That message. That simple, quiet message. Broke me more than his silence ever did. But back then, in that first moment, the moment he left without a word, I was just a woman sitting alone in a house that suddenly felt too big, too quiet, and too empty. Trying to understand why someone I loved so deeply could walk away as if love was easy to set aside. This is where the story begins. Before the morning he walked away. Before the unanswered questions. Before the message that would break something inside me. There was a life we built together. Quiet, gentle, simple, the kind of life that doesn't look special from the outside, but feels like a warm blanket on a cold night when you're living inside it. People think heartbreak starts at the end. But I think it starts much earlier. It starts in the moments you overlook because love makes everything look softer than it is. And to understand how deeply his leaving hurt, You have to understand what we were before everything changed. I met him on a day that I never expected would matter. I was sitting outside a small cafe, a place that smelled like toasted bread and quiet mornings. My friend was late, again. The sun was soft, the breeze was gentle, and I was lost in my thoughts. He walked past me with a calm step, then stopped suddenly. He stepped back like he had forgotten something important. You dropped this, he said. He held out a small folded receipt. I frowned a little. I hadn't even opened my bag yet. I don't think it's mine, I said. He blinked, looked at the receipt, then looked at me again. There was this tiny spark of embarrassment in his eyes, but also a softness. Okay. It's not, he admitted with a shy smile. I guess this was just a way to say hi. I don't know why, but the honesty made me laugh quietly. Not a big laugh, just a warm, breathy one that escapes before you think. And from that small moment, something warm unfolded between us. We talked for a few minutes. Then those minutes turned into an hour. My friend eventually texted saying she couldn't make it, but I didn't care. Because talking to him felt strangely natural. Like finding a sentence you didn't know you were trying to say for a long time. He wasn't the loud type. Not the kind who fills space with big stories or dramatic gestures. He was calm. Steady. The kind of person who speaks only when he means it. He loved reading the news quietly in the morning. He loved simple meals. He loved sitting beside me in silence without needing to explain anything. But he also loved deeply. He just didn't show it with big words. He showed it with small gestures. Like warming my side of the bed in winter before I came to sleep. Like leaving his scarf around my shoulders when I got cold. Like noticing I was tired before I noticed it myself. He once told me, I think love should feel gentle, not heavy. Back then, I believed we understood each other perfectly. We didn't fight much. We didn't scream. We didn't hurt each other intentionally. But peace can be confusing sometimes. Because quiet people also hide quiet pain. And now, looking back, I understand. The gentlest people often fight the hardest battles inside their own hearts. People always talk about big signs, big arguments, big emotional explosions. But that's not real life. In real life, the cracks appear slowly. So slowly that you think they're just shadows. The first change was the way he came home. He used to open the door with a small smile. Not a wide one, just enough to soften his eyes. But over time, his smile faded into something faint. Something tired. Long day. I would ask. Just the usual, he'd say. And the strange thing. He said it the same way every time. Like a rehearsed line. He still kissed my forehead. He still asked about my day. But something in him was already drifting like a boat untied from the shore, moving slowly without the waves making any noise. Another change. He started waking up earlier than me. Much earlier. At first, I thought he just needed fresh air. But I once woke up at 4:30 a.m. and found him sitting on the floor in the living room, staring at nothing. No lights. No sound. Just him. And silence. I whispered, "What are you doing awake?" He looked startled, like he didn't expect anyone to see him. Then he forced a small smile. Just couldn't sleep. But the pause before that answer, that long, heavy pause, meant there was more. I should have asked again. I should have sat beside him. I should have pushed gently. But I didn't. Because I thought he needed space. Because I thought giving him room to breathe was the right thing. But sometimes, the space we give becomes the distance that grows. There was one dinner I will never forget. Not because it was special, but because, looking back, it was the moment I realized something inside him was slipping away. We were eating quietly. Just two people sharing a simple meal in a small, warm house. But his hands were trembling. Just slightly enough that only someone who loves him would notice. I put my fork down. "Something is wrong," I said softly. Tell me, please. He didn't look up. He just stared at his plate as if it held all the answers he was afraid to say out loud. After a moment, he whispered, I don't want to worry you. I reached for his hand. You don't worry me. You matter to me. He finally looked into my eyes. And there was so much pain in them, so much he was trying to hide. But then, he gently pulled his hand back. Not harshly. Just slowly, as if he didn't want to inconvenience me even with his sadness. I'm fine, he said. Really. I just need some air. He stood up, went outside, and stayed there for 10 long minutes. I stayed seated, waiting, hoping he would come back and tell me what was really inside him. He did come back. He smiled faintly. We continued eating. But the silence between us that night felt heavier than any argument could have been. There were other moments too. Moments I replay in my mind even now. Moments that were actually little goodbyes. Like when he started hugging me longer than usual. Not desperate hugs. Not emotional ones. Just longer. As if he was memorizing the feeling of my arms around him. Or when he began watching me quietly when I wasn't looking. Not in a strange way. But in a way that felt like he was saying a silent thank you. A silent sorry. A silent I wish things were different. One night, he held me from behind, his chin resting on my shoulder. We looked out the window at the quiet street below. Are you okay? I asked. He didn't answer right away. Just tightened his arms around me. And then he whispered, Thank you, for everything. I smiled. I thought he was just being sweet, just being emotional. But now it feels like he was saying goodbye without using the word. The truth is, he always carried things alone. He told me once, I don't want my problems to make someone else's life heavy. And I laughed softly at the time. I said, that's not how love works. We share things. He smiled back. But not fully. Not the way he used to. He said, I know. I just don't know how. And maybe that was the beginning of the end. Not a fight. Not a mistake. Not a big explosive moment. Just a man who didn't know how to share the weight in his heart. And a woman who thought quiet love was enough to fill all the empty spaces. I wish I had known that loving someone is not only about holding them. It's also about making sure they don't drift away silently. But I didn't know then. And by the time I realized how far he had gone inside his own mind, he was already preparing to leave in silence. Here's the thing people don't see. We actually had a beautiful life. Not perfect, no relationship is. But warm. Comfortable. Full of small routines that made me feel safe. Morning tea on the balcony. Sunday walks to the nearby park. Late-night conversations about dreams that now feel like distant memories. Little notes he would leave inside my books. The way he always stood closer to the street side when we walked. The quiet laughter we shared over the smallest things. He wasn't absent in the beginning. He wasn't drifting from the start. He was present. Engaged. Soft. Loving. That's why his disappearance later felt like a wound deeper than words can explain. Because when a stranger leaves, it hurts. But when someone who once knew your heart leaves without a word, it breaks something inside you that you didn't even know could crack. A few days before he left, we stood together in the kitchen washing dishes. The most ordinary moment. I looked at him and said, Do you ever feel like life is changing too fast? He rinsed a glass slowly, thinking. Then he said softly, Sometimes. There was something in his voice, a heaviness, a tiredness. I stepped closer. You can talk to me. You know that, right? He nodded. But he didn't speak. Instead, he reached out, brushed a strand of hair behind my ear, and whispered, You're the best thing that ever happened to me. I remember smiling. I remember feeling warm. But now, that sentence feels different. It feels like he was apologizing without using the word sorry. Like he was thanking me for a chapter he had already decided to close. There is one moment, just one, that keeps replaying in my mind like a soft echo. It was late at night. We were in bed. He couldn't sleep. I could feel him tossing gently beside me. I whispered, "Do you want to talk?" He was quiet. Too quiet. Then he said, "I wish I were stronger." I didn't understand what he meant. I thought he was just being emotional. I held his hand under the blanket. "You are strong," I whispered. "More than you know." He sighed softly. A sigh that carried something I didn't yet understand. That was the last deep conversation we ever had. After that, his silence grew, and the distance between us became something I could feel in the air, even when he sat right beside me. The morning he left, all the small signs suddenly made sense. Every quiet moment, every tired smile, every long hug, every heavy pause. But at the time, I didn't want to see any of it for what it really was. Because love makes you believe things are okay, even when the person you love is slowly disappearing. And that is how the story truly began. With two people who loved each other deeply, but didn't know how to speak the pain inside them. I wish I could say the change happened suddenly. I wish I could point to one moment and say, that is when everything shifted. But the truth is, most heartbreak begins quietly, softly, without warning. It starts in the small pauses, in the unanswered questions, in the way two people begin standing beside each other, yet looking in different directions. That's how it was with us. We were still living under the same roof. We were still sharing the same meals. We were still sleeping in the same bed. But something between us had changed, something invisible, something subtle, something fragile. I didn't understand it at the time. I just felt the weight of something I couldn't name. It started with a routine or the quiet breaking of one. Every evening, we used to sit together on the balcony, just the two of us, tea in hand, talking about little things, the weather, a movie, a memory. But then, he began skipping those moments. At first, he said, "I'll be there in a minute." Then it became, "I'm too tired today." Then eventually, he didn't come at all. I sat alone some nights, holding my cup of tea, staring at the empty chair beside me, pretending not to worry. But I was worried. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quietly. The way you worry when something familiar begins to slip away and you don't know how to hold it together. He used to reply to my messages quickly. Even if he was busy. Even if he was tired. But now hours would pass. I would send a simple, "Are you okay?" And the message would stay unread until late at night. When he finally replied, it was always short. "Yeah. Just busy. Talk later." Before, we used to share everything, feelings, small jokes, silly photos, little details of our day. But now, our conversations felt like walking on thin ice. Careful. Slow. Uncertain. Sometimes I stared at the 3 little typing dots on my phone, waiting, only for them to disappear again. It hurt in a quiet way. The kind of hurt you feel in your chest but can't explain to anyone. We used to fall asleep talking. Soft whispers in the dark. A hand resting in mine. But now, he slept facing away from me. I reached out once, gently touching his shoulder. He flinched, not dramatically, just a small movement, like he wasn't expecting it. "Sorry," I whispered, pulling my hand back. He sighed. Nothing to be sorry about. But he didn't turn around. We were inches apart, but we felt like strangers in the same bed. I remember lying awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what I did wrong. Wondering if he still loved me. Wondering if I was losing him and didn't know how to stop it. It wasn't a loud heartbreak. It was quiet. Like watching snow fall, beautiful, cold, and slowly covering everything you once recognized. There was a time when talking to him felt like sunlight. Warm. Bright. effortless. But now, even asking simple questions became difficult. How was your day? Fine. Did anything happen at work? Not really. Do you want to go for a walk? Maybe later. Are you okay? I'm just tired. Always tired. Always distant. Always somewhere else. I knew he wasn't angry. He wasn't irritated. He wasn't upset with me. He was just disappearing inside himself. And I didn't know how to reach someone who was already far away emotionally. There was one day that scared me more than I can explain. He usually came home around 7. Then it became 8. Then 9. But this day, he didn't come home until almost midnight. The house was quiet. The clock kept ticking. Every minute felt longer than the last. I called. He didn't answer. I texted. No reply. I wasn't angry. I was worried. Deeply, achingly worried. When he finally walked in, his face looked exhausted, not the usual kind of tired, but a tiredness that lives under the skin. Where were you? I asked gently. He shrugged, taking off his coat. Just needed some time alone. You could have told me. I was worried. He looked at me then, and for a moment, I saw something in his eyes, guilt, sadness, something heavy. I know, he whispered. I'm sorry. He hugged me, but it was brief, quick, almost rushed. And then, instead of sitting with me or talking, he went straight to the bedroom and lay down without another word. That night, I slept facing the other way too, not because I didn't want to be close, but because I didn't want him to feel pressured. But it hurt. In a quiet, deep way that made my chest feel tight. One Sunday, I suggested we go for a walk. It used to be our favorite routine. He said yes, but it wasn't the same. We walked side by side, but it felt like there was an invisible distance between us. He kept looking at the ground. I kept glancing at him, hoping he would say something. Anything. Finally, I asked softly, "Are we okay?" He slowed down, hands in his pockets. "We're fine," he said. But his voice didn't sound fine. It sounded tired, worn out, like someone pretending to carry a weight much heavier than he could handle. I wanted to ask more. I wanted to grab his hand and hold it tight. But I didn't push. I didn't want to make things worse. And maybe that was my mistake too. Maybe sometimes silence does more damage than honesty ever could. It was late. I went to check on him because he had been quiet for hours again. I found him sitting on the side of the bed, face in his hands. He wasn't sobbing. He wasn't shaking. Just sitting there, breathing heavily, trying not to fall apart. My heart broke instantly. I walked toward him and placed my hand gently on his back. He stiffened at first, like he didn't expect anyone to touch him. Then he relaxed a little, but not fully. "What's wrong?" He shook his head slowly. "I can't talk about it." "Why not?" "I don't want to hurt you." I sat beside him. "You won't hurt me." He closed his eyes. "I will." His voice cracked just a little. Just enough to make my chest ache. I leaned my head on his shoulder. "You don't have to carry everything alone." He didn't answer. He didn't cry louder. He didn't open up. He just sat there. Silent, heavy, lost. And I felt helpless. Because loving someone means wanting to fix their pain. But sometimes their pain has walls you cannot break through, no matter how gentle your hands are. A week later, I found a small box in the corner of the bedroom. Not packed fully. Not hidden. Just there. Inside were a few of his things. A book. A notebook. A photo frame with us in it. My heart skipped. "Are you going somewhere?" I asked later that evening. He looked at the box, then back at me. "No," he said quickly. "I was just organizing." But the way he avoided my eyes, the way his voice trembled just slightly, told me he was lying. Something inside me whispered, "He's slipping away." But I ignored it. I told myself not to overthink. I told myself it was just stress. Even when your heart knows the truth, your mind sometimes refuses to follow. There was a night. One I didn't realize was important until later. I woke up at 2 a.m. The bed beside me was cold. I walked out of the bedroom, half asleep. He was standing in the hallway, looking at the front door. Not touching it. Not moving. Just staring. I whispered his name. He turned slowly, startled. "What are you doing?" I asked softly. He ran a hand through his hair. "I couldn't sleep." "You were going out?" "No," he said quickly. "Just thinking." But something felt wrong. Deeply wrong. I stepped closer. "Come back to bed." He hesitated only for a second, then nodded and followed me quietly. He fell asleep quickly that night. But I couldn't. His face looked peaceful, but in a way that scared me, like someone who had made a decision and finally felt relieved. I didn't know it then. But that was the night he had already chosen to leave. He just hadn't walked out yet. The days after that felt strange. He was polite. He was calm. But he was distant in a way that felt final. He would smile, but only with his lips. He would talk, but without warmth. He would sit beside me, but not close enough. Every moment felt like a soft goodbye. A slow fade out. Like the last few minutes of a sad movie when you already know how it ends. I didn't want to see it. I didn't want to feel it. I kept telling myself things would get better. But deep down, a quiet part of me knew. I was losing him. And I didn't know how to hold on. The rail break didn't happen in a fight. It didn't happen in shouting. It didn't happen with anger. It happened in silence. In distance. In the way he started looking through me instead of at me. And that silence was only the beginning. Because soon, everything would fall apart. He would leave without a word. And her final message, the one I didn't expect, the one I didn't understand until it was too late, would break me in a way I never saw coming. The days that followed were slower, heavier, and strangely quiet. You would think that after all our small misunderstandings, after all those subtle changes in him that I kept ignoring, I would have been more prepared for what was coming. But I wasn't. Not even a little. Looking back now, I realize that relationships don't break in a single moment. They fade. Quietly, gently, almost invisibly. Like a candle burning out while you're looking in another direction. And in our case, the fading had already begun long before that morning. One evening, about a month before he left, we were sitting together on the living room couch. The television was on, but we weren't watching it. Not really. It was just background noise to cover the distance forming between us. He was scrolling through his phone. I was holding a book I wasn't reading. "Are you tired?" I asked softly. He nodded, but his eyes never left the screen. "Yeah. Just a lot going on." He didn't explain. That used to bother me, but that night, it bothered me more than usual. Maybe because I could tell the word lot didn't only mean work. It meant something deeper. Something he didn't want to share. So I tried again. "Is there something on your mind?" He hesitated. Just for a second. But that second was enough to tell me he was choosing his words carefully. "No," he finally said. "I'm fine." But he wasn't. He hadn't been for a while. I closed my book gently, hoping he would look at me on his own. He didn't. He kept scrolling. The soft glow of his phone lighting up his face, while mine stayed in the dim shadows beside him. I remember feeling like we were in the same room, yet living in different worlds. Another moment stands out clearly in my memory. We were sitting at the small table in our kitchen eating dinner. I had made his favorite, a simple dish, nothing special, but he used to smile every time I made it. This time he took a bite, nodded and said, "It's good." Just that. No smile. No warmth. I wanted to pretend I didn't notice. But after a few minutes, I couldn't stop myself. "You've been quiet lately," I said softly. "Is everything okay?" He put his fork down slowly, like he needed time to prepare his answer. "Yeah. Just thinking about things." "What things?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. He sighed. "Life. Work. Us. Everything." That single word "us" hit me like a cold breeze. It was the first time he had included our relationship in his list of worries. "What about us?" I asked, my heart tightening. He shook his head. "I don't know. I just need some time to figure my thoughts out." I looked at him for a long moment. He didn't look back. He kept staring at his plate, poking at the food he no longer seemed interested in. And I remember thinking how strange it was how someone could be sitting right in front of you and still feel like they were slipping away. In those days, I kept trying little things to reach him. Simple gestures. Small conversations. Quiet moments where I hoped he would open up. But it felt like every time I moved closer, he took one tiny step back. Not far. Not dramatically. Just enough that I could feel the space growing. One night, I suggested we go for a walk. He used to love our evening walks, slow, peaceful, filled with small talks about nothing important and everything meaningful. But that evening, he shook his head gently. "I'm tired," he said. And that was all. Another night, I made him tea, the kind he liked, the one with the soft smell he always said reminded him of home. He thanked me, but he didn't drink it. It stayed untouched on the table until it turned cold. Even when I leaned my head gently on his shoulder while we were sitting on the couch, he stiffened for the smallest second. Not enough to call it rejection, but enough for me to feel it. Enough for me to understand that something was changing. Something inside him was slowly closing off, like a door he didn't want to leave open anymore. There was one evening that still echoes in my mind. We were getting ready for bed. I was brushing my hair, and he was sitting at the edge of the bed tying his shoelaces even though he wasn't going anywhere. I turned to him quietly. "Do you still feel the same about us?" He paused mid-motion. His fingers tightened around the lace, and he let out a slow breath. "I don't know," he whispered. The room suddenly felt colder. "I'm not unhappy," he continued softly. "I'm just confused. Lost. I need to understand what I want and who I am right now." I swallowed, trying to keep my voice steady. "And am I part of that? Your future? Your plans?" My words were barely above a whisper. He looked away, toward the window. "I'm trying to figure that out." My heart sank. But I nodded. Because I didn't want to push him. I didn't want to make him feel trapped or pressured. I just wanted him to come back to me on his own. But I didn't know then that sometimes people don't come back. Sometimes the distance becomes too familiar, too comfortable, too quiet. As the weeks passed, I could feel the shift becoming stronger. He talked less. He stayed out longer. He stopped sharing the small details of his day, the ones that used to bring us closer. When I asked how his day had been, he would answer with a single word. "Fine. Good. Busy." I tried to fill the spaces between those words with love and patience. But the spaces kept growing. And one night, after he had gone to bed early, I whispered to myself, "He's leaving in his heart before he leaves in his body." It was a quiet truth. A painful one. And I didn't want to accept it. So I distracted myself with hope. With the belief that people sometimes change, but come back. That love bends but doesn't break. I didn't know then that the moment was approaching. The moment when the quiet cracks would finally split open. When his silence would turn into absence. And his absence would turn into a wound I wasn't ready for. Because soon, very soon, he would leave without a word. And the message he left behind, the one I found later, would change everything. The morning he left did not start with a fight. It did not start with raised voices or harsh words. It started quietly, almost peacefully. And sometimes, that kind of calm hurts the most. I woke up before him that day. The sky outside was still soft and gray, the kind of color that makes the world feel half asleep. I remember looking at him for a moment, watching the slow rise and fall of his breathing, wondering if he felt as far from me as I felt from him. There was something different about the way he slept that morning. He looked peaceful, but too peaceful, like he had made some decision in his heart and finally felt relieved. I didn't know then what that decision was. I got out of bed quietly, trying not to wake him. I went to the kitchen and made tea, just like I always did. The simple routine was comforting, even though the air felt heavier than usual. When he finally walked into the kitchen, his face looked tired, but calm. He nodded at me, said good morning, and sat down. There was a strange silence between us. Not awkward, not cold, just final. I poured his tea and placed it in front of him. He looked at it for a moment, then at me. "Thank you," he said softly. I smiled, but it felt weak, like something inside me was already preparing for a goodbye I couldn't see yet. We ate breakfast quietly. He didn't touch much of his food. He kept glancing toward the hallway, toward the door, as if something was calling him from outside. And every time he looked away, I felt a tiny tremor inside me. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. After breakfast, he stood up slowly and walked to the living room. I followed him with my eyes, waiting for him to say something. Anything. He sat on the couch and rubbed his hands together, a habit he had when he was anxious. My heart tightened. I walked over and sat gently beside him. "Is everything okay?" I asked. He nodded, but the nod was too quick, too forced. "I'm fine," he said. But he wasn't. And he knew I knew. I waited a moment, then whispered, "You can talk to me." He looked at me then. Really looked at me. And for a moment, it felt like he wanted to say everything, every fear, every thought, every piece of confusion inside him. But instead, he looked away. And that was the moment I realized he was not just choosing silence, he was choosing distance. "I have some things to do today," he said quietly. "I might be out for a while." I nodded. I didn't want to push him. I didn't want to be the reason he felt trapped. So I forced a small smile. "Okay. Just be safe." He nodded again. Then he stood up. At first, I thought he was just going to get his jacket. But when he walked into the bedroom and closed the door behind him, I felt a cold rush of fear move through me. I waited in the hallway, listening. I heard drawers opening, closet doors moving, the soft, familiar sound of him sighing. I didn't say a word. I didn't knock. I didn't ask anything. I just waited. When he finally stepped out of the bedroom, he wasn't holding his jacket. He was holding a small bag, the kind he used for short trips. It wasn't full. It wasn't heavy. Just a few things. Small enough that he could leave quickly. Light enough that I wouldn't notice immediately if I wasn't standing right there. My breath caught in my chest. "You're leaving," I whispered. He paused. He looked at the floor. He didn't answer. That silence, that small, sharp silence, was louder than heartbreak. I stepped closer. "Are you coming back?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. He swallowed hard. His eyes stayed down. I just need some time," he said softly. His voice trembled. Just a little. But enough for me to hear that this wasn't a sudden decision. He had been thinking about it for a long time. "How long?" I asked. He didn't know. Or maybe he did, but he couldn't bring himself to say it out loud. "I'll call you," he whispered. But I knew he wouldn't. People don't need to say goodbye when they plan to return. They don't pack quietly. They don't look at the floor instead of your eyes. They don't choose silence over explanation. I felt my throat tighten, but I kept my voice steady. "Can you at least tell me why?" He closed his eyes for a moment. And for the first time in months, I saw pain on his face. Not anger. Not frustration. Just sadness. I don't know who I am anymore, he whispered. And I don't want to hurt you while I'm trying to figure it out. I nodded slowly. Not because I understood, but because I didn't know what else to do. I wanted to hold his hand. I wanted to tell him we could fix things. I wanted to remind him of everything we had built together. But I didn't want to beg him to stay. I didn't want him to stay out of guilt. So I said nothing. He put on his shoes quietly. He walked toward the door quietly. He opened it quietly. And then he stood there for a few seconds, not looking back, not stepping out either, just standing in that small space between staying and leaving. I held my breath, hoping he would turn around. He didn't. He stepped out and closed the door gently behind him. No goodbye. No reassurance. No final words. Just silence. And silence can be the sharpest goodbye in the world. I stood there for a long time after he left. I didn't cry at first. I didn't shout his name. I didn't run after him. I just stood there with my hand on the door, feeling the cool surface against my palm. Every memory we shared. Every smile. Every quiet moment. Every hope. They all felt like they were slipping through my fingers, leaving me with nothing but the echo of a door shutting softly. Hours passed. Maybe more. I don't remember. But at some point, I walked back into the bedroom. And that was when I saw it. A small paper on the bedside table. Folded neatly. Placed carefully. Not a letter. Not a goodbye. Just a small message. I didn't open it then. I was too afraid. Afraid of what it would say. Afraid of what it wouldn't say. I sat on the edge of the bed and held that small paper between my fingers. It felt heavier than anything else in the room. I didn't know it yet. But that message, that simple, quiet message, would break me more than his silence ever did. Because it wasn't angry. It wasn't cold. It wasn't cruel. It was honest. And the truth inside it was something I wasn't prepared for. Something that would change everything. Something that would hurt in a way I can still feel today. I didn't open it then. Not yet. But the moment he walked away, the moment the door closed, that was the moment my heart finally understood. He didn't just leave the house. He left us. After he walked out of the bedroom with that small travel bag, time began to feel strange. Everything slowed down, as if the world wanted me to notice every small detail, every tiny sign I had missed before. It was painful, but a part of me needed to feel every second so I would never forget what a quiet goodbye looks like. He sat on the couch again and rested the bag beside him. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't panicking. He looked tired. Like someone who had been fighting a storm inside himself for months and finally stopped resisting. I stood near the kitchen doorway, watching him. He didn't look up, but he must have felt my eyes on him, because he spoke without lifting his head. I don't want you to think this is your fault, he whispered. His voice was so gentle, so fragile, it felt like touching glass. I stepped forward slowly. Then whose fault is it? My words were soft, steady, but inside, everything was shaking. He rubbed his hands together again. I don't know who I'm becoming, he said. And I don't want to take you through that confusion with me. I swallowed carefully. You don't have to go through anything alone. He smiled, but it was a sad, almost broken smile. I think I do, he said. There was a long pause after that. The kind that fills a room with questions that nobody wants to ask. I sat down across from him, keeping some distance because I was afraid that if I sat beside him, I would hold on to him and never let go. When did you start feeling this way? I asked quietly. He looked toward the window again, the same direction he always looked when he didn't want to show his emotions. A while ago, he murmured. Before I even realized it. Why didn't you tell me? I already knew the answer, but I needed to hear it. He sighed. I didn't want to hurt you. But leaving hurts more, I whispered. This time, he finally looked at me. His eyes tired, full of conflict, full of a love that was fading but still real in its own way met mine. I know, he said, but staying when I'm lost hurts you in a quieter way. And I didn't want to do that anymore. He wasn't wrong. The truth stung because it was honest. All those evenings he came home late. All those moments he avoided simple conversations. All those nights he slept facing the other side of the bed. Those were quiet hurts. Soft, invisible cracks he never wanted me to feel, but I felt them anyway. Sometimes, love doesn't break loudly. Sometimes it crumbles gently, piece by piece, while both people pretend not to notice. He stood up again, restless. Walked a few steps. Stopped. Sat down again. He couldn't settle, like the decision was burning through him. At one point, he reached for his phone, stared at it, and then put it back into his pocket. That simple movement made something inside me ache. "What are you thinking about?" I asked softly. He shook his head. "Everything I should have said," he whispered. "Then say it," I encouraged gently. But he closed his eyes, inhaled deeply, and said nothing. And I understood in that moment that the words he wanted to say were the same words he couldn't bear to let out because speaking them would make everything final. People think leaving is the hardest part. But sometimes, it's the words left unsaid that hurt the most. A little later, he walked into the hallway and touched the doorknob. Not opening the door. Just resting his hand on it. Almost like he was preparing himself. Almost like he was gathering strength to break both of our hearts. He whispered something then so quietly I barely heard it. "I'm sorry." 2 soft words. Barely audible. But they cut deeper than anything else. I took a small step toward him, but not close enough to stop him. "If you're going to leave," I whispered, "just let me say one thing." He turned his head slightly, just enough to show he was listening. "You don't have to disappear," I said gently. "Even if you're confused. Even if you feel lost. You don't have to walk away alone." His shoulders tightened. His fingers curled around the doorknob. His breath trembled. And then, with a quiet voice, he said, "I think this is the only way I know right now." It wasn't what I wanted to hear. But it was honest. Sometimes honesty doesn't heal. Sometimes it leaves a bruise that takes a long time to fade. He opened the door a little, just enough for cold morning air to slip inside. I felt it brush against my skin, and for a moment, I wondered if this was how goodbyes always felt. Cool. Sudden. Sharp. He didn't step out immediately. He stood there breathing slowly, as if trying to convince himself he was doing the right thing. I wanted to ask him to turn around. I wanted to say his name and pull him back inside. I wanted to remind him of all the things we survived together. All the moments that held us close. But a strange calm washed over me. A soft, painful understanding. If someone is halfway out the door in their heart, pulling them back doesn't keep them here. It only delays the moment when they finally walk away. So I stayed quiet. He finally turned his head a little, just enough to glance at me from the corner of his eye. There was sadness there. Genuine sadness. Not regret. Not anger. Just the quiet pain of someone who wishes things were different, but knows they aren't. "I'll call you," he whispered again. But I didn't believe it. And I think he knew that too. Then he stepped out. One foot. Then the other. He didn't look back. Not once. The door closed softly behind him. No slam. No loud goodbye. Just a small click. A sound so gentle, yet so final. I stood there long after he left. Each second felt stretched, heavy, full of meaning I didn't ask for. The house felt different, too quiet, too still, too aware of the space he no longer filled. Eventually, I walked back into the bedroom. That's when I saw it. The folded note. The one he left on the table beside the bed. Placed deliberately. Not hidden, not rushed. My heart tightened as I picked it up. It was small. Just a single piece of paper. But the moment I touched it, I felt the weight of everything unsaid pressing against my chest. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding the note carefully, like it might break if I unfolded it too fast. I wasn't ready to read it. Not then. Not yet. I just sat there with it in my hand, feeling the world shrink into that one small message. I didn't know what it would say. I didn't know what truths it would reveal. But I knew one thing. This message, the one he left behind, would hurt in a way nothing else had. Not because it was cruel, not because it was angry, but because it would be honest, painfully, quietly honest, in a way words rarely are. And finding the truth inside that note was going to break me more than his leaving ever did. I remember the days right after everything fell apart between us. They felt strangely empty, like the world had turned down its volume. Even simple things, like the sound of my own footsteps on the floor, seemed softer. I moved slowly around the house, like I was afraid to disturb something fragile in the air. I kept thinking about him. Not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, steady ache that lived inside my chest. There were moments when I found myself standing still, holding a cup or looking out the window, wondering where he was. Wondering if he ever stopped and thought of me too. The house had changed since he left. It was not loud anymore. It did not echo with conversations. It felt like a place waiting for someone to come home. But no one did. Only I walked through the rooms, touching the furniture, fixing small things, trying to stay busy so my heart would not fall apart. In those days, I kept returning to a single question. Why did he leave without a word? There were answers I tried to give myself, but none felt enough. Maybe he was tired. Maybe he was confused. Maybe he was hurting in ways I never understood. And sometimes, in the quietest moments, I wondered if I had failed to see something important. Maybe I was so focused on my own worries that I didn't notice the weight he was carrying. One evening, while sitting alone in the living room, I closed my eyes and replayed a memory, one that suddenly felt heavier than the rest. It was a small moment from months earlier. We had been sitting at the table, talking about ordinary things, when he stopped mid-sentence and stared at his hands. I had asked him what was wrong, and he forced a smile. Just tired, he said. I believed him. But now, thinking back, I felt something twist inside me. Maybe he wasn't tired. Maybe he was slipping away even then. These thoughts kept circling in my mind, not to blame either of us, but to understand what led us to a place where silence became easier than speaking. Every night, I lay in bed and whispered quiet questions into the dark. They always returned unanswered. Still, even with all this pain, there was a small part of me that wanted to believe there was something more. Something he couldn't say. Something he wished he could explain. I held on to that thought like a thin thread in my hand. The turning point did not arrive as a big moment. It came gently, almost silently, just like he had left. It started with a message. Not from him, but about him. I was cleaning the kitchen when my phone buzzed. I almost ignored it because I had stopped expecting anything meaningful from that small sound. But something made me pick it up. It was a voice note from someone I barely knew, his cousin. Her voice was soft, almost careful. Can we talk? It's important. For a moment, I just stood there, holding the phone in my hand. A wave of fear rose slowly inside me, the kind that makes your chest feel heavy. I didn't know what she was going to say, but my heart already sensed something wasn't right. I called her back, and she answered quickly. There was no small talk. No warm greeting. Only a quiet breath before she spoke. I think you should know. He's not doing well. The words hit me like cold water. My fingers tightened around the phone. I didn't speak. I just waited. She continued slowly, giving me pieces of a truth he had never told me. He had been struggling. For a long time. In ways he never allowed anyone to see. He had lost someone close recently. He had been carrying guilt that did not belong to him. He had been hiding an overwhelming sadness behind calm smiles. And suddenly, so many small moments from our past began to make sense. His quiet pauses. His empty gaze at random times. His sudden disappearances from conversations. His "just tired" explanations. I felt something break softly inside me, not from anger, but from heartbreaking understanding. He wasn't running away from me. He was running away from his own pain. When the call ended, I sat on the floor and took slow breaths, letting the truth settle inside me. There was no noise around me, only a deep, aching silence. And in that silence, I felt something shift. Not everything, not instantly, but something. For the first time, I saw the whole picture, not just my hurt, but his. Not just his silence, but the storm he was hiding. Not just his leaving, but the weight behind it. That was the turning point. The moment where blame softened and understanding began. A few days later, something unexpected happened. I heard a soft knock at my door. Not urgent. Not loud. Just gentle, as if the person on the other side was unsure if they deserved to be there. My heart paused. For a second, I couldn't move. Then I walked slowly to the door and opened it. And there he was. He looked different. Not physically, but in the way he carried himself. His shoulders were slightly dropped, and his eyes, they held something I had not seen before. Not distance. Not avoidance. Something closer to honesty and exhaustion. He didn't step inside. He just stood there and whispered, "I'm sorry." His voice trembled. I felt mine break inside me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The world seemed to pause around us. Then he said a few words that would change everything between us. "I didn't leave because of you. I left because I couldn't breathe anymore." He took a shaky breath. "And I didn't want you to see me fall apart." When he said those words, something inside me softened in a way I couldn't explain. All the pain of being left behind was still there, but now, alongside it, there was understanding. Real, fragile understanding. He finally spoke about everything he had been hiding: the grief, the fear, the mistakes, the long nights when he felt completely alone even while standing next to me. He told me he didn't want to burden me. He thought disappearing would protect me. He thought silence was safer. I listened. Not because I wanted explanations, but because I needed to hear his truth. And when he finished, he lowered his eyes as if expecting me to turn away. But I didn't. I simply whispered, "You should have told me." His eyes filled with tears. He tried to blink away. And in that moment, I realized something important. The real turning point wasn't him speaking. It was me understanding. It was the moment our pain finally met in the middle, and neither of us was standing alone anymore. The days after he left started to blend together in a slow, quiet blur. I woke up each morning feeling like the world had lost a layer of color. Even sunlight entering through the windows looked pale, as if it was tired too. I moved gently around the house, careful with every small thing, almost like anything louder than a whisper would break something fragile inside my heart. There were times I sat on the edge of my bed without meaning to. I just found myself there, staring at the floor, thinking about how quickly life can change. One moment someone is close enough to touch, and the next moment, it feels like they never existed at all. I kept asking myself if I had said something wrong. If my silence had hurt him. If my busy days made him feel unseen. Every room carried a memory of him. The couch where he used to rest his head on the armrest. The dining chair he always pulled out even though there were others. The corner of the kitchen where he would stand quietly when he didn't know how to say what was bothering him. I noticed the smallest details. His absence made me see them clearer. Sometimes I wondered if he noticed mine too. Did he miss the way I made tea? Did he remember the soft hum I used to make while folding clothes? Did he ever think about the simple moments, the ones we forgot to appreciate? Questions like these stayed with me. They walked beside me throughout the day. And at night, they slept next to me. One evening, I opened the old wooden cabinet in our living room. I don't know what I was looking for. Maybe something he left behind. Maybe a piece of him I could hold. I found nothing, but the act of searching made something in me feel heavy. It reminded me that healing begins in small moments, even in moments where we find nothing at all. I kept thinking about the last time he looked at me properly. His eyes were tired, not from lack of sleep, but from holding too much inside. And now, looking back, I realized something painful. He wasn't pushing me away. He was drowning quietly. And I never heard him call for help. The voice note from his cousin kept replaying in my mind long after the call ended. I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet, listening to the echo of her words. He's not doing well. Those 4 words carried a weight I wasn't ready for. They opened a door inside me, a door that led to everything I had not seen. Things he never told me. Feelings he hid behind a calm face. Sorrows he carried alone. His cousin told me he had stopped answering calls from everyone. He wasn't eating properly. He wasn't sleeping. He had withdrawn from every circle of his life, not just mine. She said he had been carrying grief from a loss he never spoke about, and the weight of it had slowly taken away his ability to be present. After the call, my thoughts were a storm, but a gentle one, the kind you can't escape because it moves slowly and surrounds you from all sides. I felt a strange mixture of fear for him, guilt for not knowing, and a quiet sorrow that softened my breath. I sat there for a long time, letting her words sink in. There were so many moments when I had seen confusion in his eyes. Moments when he seemed distracted. Moments when he paused before answering, as if he was choosing between speaking and staying silent. And now, all those moments formed a picture so clear it almost made me cry. He wasn't running away from me. He was breaking under a weight I never saw. I remembered something his cousin said right before ending the call. He still cares for you more than he can say. That sentence wrapped itself around my heart. I held on to it like a lifeline. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe understanding him now was still a kind of caring. Maybe caring didn't need to be perfect. Later that night, I sat near the window, looking at the empty street outside. The streetlights flickered gently, like they were breathing. I placed my hand over my chest and whispered softly into the quiet room. I wish you had told me. And for the first time, I wasn't saying it out of pain. I was saying it out of love, the kind of love that understands too late, but still understands beautifully. The day he returned stays with me like a soft photograph in my memory, calm, faded, but unforgettable. I remember every sound. The gentle tapping on the door. The way the clock on the wall ticked slower. The small breath I took before reaching for the handle. When I opened the door and saw him standing there, it felt like time paused. Not dramatically, but quietly, as if the world wanted to give us both a moment to understand what was happening. He looked fragile. Not weak, just fragile, like someone who had walked through too many heavy days without rest. His eyes told me everything before he spoke. There was regret, sadness, and something else, a longing to be understood without judgment. He tried to smile, but it came out broken. Can I talk to you?" he asked, almost whispering. I stepped aside without thinking, but he didn't come in. He stayed at the door, like he didn't believe he had the right to walk inside anymore. Then he said the words he had probably rehearsed for days. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." His voice cracked on the second, "sorry," and something inside me softened. Just hearing him speak again made the silence of the past days feel less heavy. He continued, his hands shaking slightly. "I didn't leave because of you. I left because I was scared. I felt like I was falling apart and didn't want you to see me like that." His honesty felt raw, almost too real. There were no excuses. No blaming. Just truth, spoken gently. He told me about the long nights he spent awake. About the sadness he carried from a loss he never allowed himself to grieve. About the guilt he felt for being distant. And finally, he said the words that broke my heart in the most human way. "I didn't know how to stay, when I couldn't even stay with myself. I listened quietly. No interruptions. No anger. Just presence. He lowered his head afterwards, as if expecting rejection. But instead, I whispered something simple, something honest. You weren't alone. You just thought you were. His eyes lifted slowly, filled with tears he tried to hide. We stood there, not as two people who hurt each other, but as two people who had finally reached the point where pain stops being a wall and becomes a bridge. For the first time, I understood that love doesn't always look like perfect communication. Sometimes it looks like making mistakes, losing pieces of each other, and then finding a way back with gentler steps. And that was the true turning point. Not his return. Not his apology. But our shared understanding that silence doesn't always mean lack of love. Sometimes it means someone is fighting a battle they don't have the words for yet. After that day, the air between us changed. It didn't suddenly become perfect. It didn't erase the days of silence, the unspoken fears, or the pain of him walking away. But something shifted. Something quiet, soft, like the first breath of morning after a long night. We didn't speak much at first. Not about the past. Not about the reasons. We just sat together, side by side, letting our presence be enough. I realized that sometimes, healing doesn't start with words. It starts with patience. With allowing space for pain to settle, for understanding to grow. He would still glance at the floor sometimes. Still fidget when memories surfaced. But slowly, those moments became smaller. The heavy weight of guilt he carried began to lighten, just slightly, with every soft word of reassurance. And I learned to breathe with him in that weight, instead of against it. At night, we would sit quietly in the living room, letting the soft glow of the lamp fill the space. Sometimes, I would make tea, and we would drink it together, slowly. The sound of the cups clinking gently, the warmth in our hands, the soft, even breathing. All of it became a kind of therapy we didn't know we needed. One evening, he said something I will never forget. I didn't realize how much I was hurting you by hurting myself. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something I hadn't seen in months' awareness. Not a dramatic revelation. Not a sudden burst of clarity. Just quiet, honest understanding. You're here now, I said softly. That's enough. And for a moment, it was. Because sometimes, the first step toward healing isn't grand gestures. It's simply showing up. Even when everything inside you feels broken. In the weeks that followed, we began to rebuild. Not as if nothing had happened. Not as if the silence and absence hadn't left their marks. But slowly, gently, like a fragile plant growing after winter, we started to find our way back to each other. We learned to talk again. Not about everything all at once. Not about the heavy topics we had avoided for so long. But about the small things. The ordinary moments that remind you life still exists, even after heartbreak. Did you sleep well? I would ask. Coffee or tea? He would answer with a soft smile. Small, simple words. But each one carried more weight than anything dramatic ever could. We also started sharing our feelings more honestly. Not in an overwhelming flood, but in small, measured truths. I told him when I felt afraid of losing him again. He told me when his mind felt heavy. And in those moments, we discovered something important. Vulnerability doesn't push people away. It invites them closer. One quiet afternoon, we sat together in the backyard. The sun was warm, but not harsh. He reached for my hand without saying anything. And I realized that touch could speak louder than words. A simple hand on top of mine said, I'm here. I didn't leave. I won't leave again. We didn't need to rush back to a perfect relationship. We didn't pretend the past hadn't happened. But we embraced the slow, deliberate work of being present for each other. And in that, we found hope. The most powerful lessons, I realized, weren't about love or romance. They were about empathy, patience, and forgiveness. About seeing someone not just for who they are when life is easy, but for who they are when life is breaking them down. And in seeing him, I saw myself as well, my own fears, my own struggles, my own need to understand. One evening, after months of slow healing, he wrote me a small note. Not dramatic. Not long. Just a quiet acknowledgement of what had happened. I don't ever want to hide from you again, it said. I don't want silence to ever come between us like that. I will try, not perfectly, but honestly, to be present. I read it and felt tears prick at the edges of my eyes. Not the harsh, painful tears of loss, but soft, gentle tears of relief, of gratitude, of love that survived the quietest, heaviest storms. We sat together that night, holding hands, letting the soft sounds of our breathing fill the room. And I realized something important. Life is not about avoiding pain. It's about learning how to stay with each other in it. How to face silence and fear and still choose to show up. I had been broken by his leaving. But I had also been healed by his return. By his honesty. By his willingness to fight not just for himself, but for us. And slowly, quietly, we began to feel whole again. Even after all the silence. Even after the fear. Even after the heartbreak. Because love, the kind that survives, isn't about never leaving. It's about coming back. And staying. Life doesn't always give us clear answers. Sometimes, the hardest moments leave us with more questions than comfort. But I've learned that it's not always the answers that matter, it's the way we hold ourselves, and the way we hold others, while navigating the uncertainty. Looking back, I see that the days he left were not only the darkest, but also the most transformative. I felt a depth of sorrow I had never known. I felt fear, doubt, and a quiet loneliness that could have swallowed me whole. And yet, I also discovered resilience. A capacity to love even when it hurts. A strength to let someone go and still hope for their return. He didn't just leave without a word. He left a space for me to understand him better. To understand myself better. To realize that love is not just comfort and laughter, it is patience, understanding, and forgiveness. It is noticing the cracks before they break us, and caring enough to stay, even when it's difficult. We've learned to rebuild slowly. We've learned to cherish the small, quiet moments, the hand reaching for mine across the table, the soft smile in the morning light, the tea shared without words but full of meaning. Those moments are the foundation of something real, something lasting. Not perfect, not without struggle, but genuine. I've also learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending the pain never existed. It means accepting it, holding it gently, and letting it guide us towards something better. Even the moments that broke me taught me lessons I could carry forward. About empathy, about patience, and about love that survives hardship. And most importantly, I've learned that silence doesn't always signify the end. Sometimes it's the beginning of understanding. Sometimes it's the space we need to see each other more clearly. Sometimes it is the quiet before a deeper connection emerges. Every time I think about that morning when he walked out, I feel a pang of sadness, a soft ache in my chest. But I also feel gratitude. Gratitude for the journey. Gratitude for the honesty that followed. Gratitude for the love that found its way back, quietly, without drama, without noise, but with all the sincerity in the world. If there is one thing I want to remember from this experience, it is this. Life is fragile. People are fragile. And love is not just about presence. It's about showing up, even when the weight of the world presses down. It's about holding space for someone else's pain, even if it means standing in silence. It's about being gentle with others, and with yourself. So, if you ever find yourself standing at the edge of heartbreak, remember this. Sometimes letting go is not the end. Sometimes it is the first step toward a deeper understanding, a truer love, and a gentler life. And in that quiet, soft place where understanding meets hope, you find the truth. Even after silence, after absence, after fear and sorrow, love can survive. Love can heal. Love can endure. It doesn't always come easily. It doesn't always come immediately. But when it does, It carries with it the weight of everything learned, everything felt, and everything understood. And that love patient, honest, and gentle is the kind that lasts.